In the vast emptiness of the New Mexico desert, where the stars burn brighter than anywhere on Earth, something impossible happened. She fell from the sky, not as a meteor, not as debris, but as a living, breathing being from another world. Her ship had failed, her body was broken, and as the sand embraced her like a grave, she accepted her fate. Death would come gently here, under alien stars that weren't hers. She closed her violet eyes for the last time, or so she thought. But fate, or perhaps something more mysterious, had other plans. When consciousness returned, it wasn't the cold embrace of death that greeted her. Instead, she found herself wrapped in rough cotton sheets, the scent of coffee and leather filling her senses and a pair of startled blue eyes staring down at her. A cowboy, a human, and somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. What follows is a story of survival against all odds, of two beings from different worlds learning to trust each other, and of a connection that defies the very fabric of space and time. This is the story of how an alien warrior found home in the most unexpected place, and how a lonely rancher discovered that the universe is far stranger and more beautiful than he ever imagined. The crash had been silent, which was the first mercy. The second was that no one had seen it, no military satellites, no curious tourists with cameras, no government agencies with their probing questions and cold laboratories. Just the desert, infinite and indifferent, swallowing secrets as it had done for millennia. Jake Morrison had been checking fence lines on the eastern edge of his property when he saw the streak across the sky. Not a shooting star. He'd seen plenty of those during lonely nights. This was different. It moved with purpose before faltering, zigzagging like a wounded bird, before disappearing behind the ridge. He told himself it was probably nothing, maybe a military drone gone off course from the base, 50 miles south. But something pulled at him, an instinct he couldn't name. By the time he reached the impact site, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson. The ship, if you could call it that, had buried itself partially in the sand, its surface like liquid mercury, reflecting and absorbing light simultaneously. It was roughly the size of his pickup truck, but shaped like nothing he'd ever seen, organic and technological at once. And 20 feet from it, collapsed in the sand, was her. Jake approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his back. But when he got close enough to see her clearly, all thoughts of danger evaporated. She was humanoid, unmistakably so, but equally unmistakably not human. Her skin had a faint luminescence, like moonlight on water, with patterns of silvery marks running along her arms, and neck not tattoos, but something that seemed to pulse faintly with her weakening heartbeat. Her hair was long and moved with a life of its own, as if underwater, shifting between shades of deep blue and violet. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with a slender but clearly athletic build. Most striking were her eyes, which fluttered open briefly as he knelt beside her, large, almond-shaped, and entirely violet with flecks of gold. She wore something that looked like armor, but it was damaged, cracked, and dim, with what appeared to be blood-dark purple, almost black seeping from wounds beneath it. She tried to speak, her lips forming words in a language that sounded like music and mathematics combined. Then her eyes fixed on his, and he saw something universal there. Fear, pain, and resignation. She was dying. Jake Morrison was not a man prone to impulsive decisions. 42 years old, he'd spent the last decade alone on his ranch after his wife left, preferring the company of horses and cattle to people. He was practical, rational, and deeply private. But looking at this dying being from another world, he made a choice that would change everything. He couldn't save her ship. It was already dissolving, breaking down into particles that scattered on the desert wind, as if programmed to leave no trace. But he could save her. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, her body temperature alternating between burning hot and ice cold. She didn't resist, didn't have the strength, Her head lolled against his chest, those impossible eyes closing once more. He carried her to his truck, wrapped her in a blanket, and drove through the gathering darkness back to his ranch house, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer and implications he didn't want to consider. What was he supposed to do? Call the authorities? He could already imagine the black SUVs, the men in suits, the way she'd disappear into some government facility never to be seen again. No, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he knew he had to protect her, at least until he understood what was happening, until he could figure out if she was a threat, a refugee, or something else entirely. He carried her into his house, past the modest living room with its worn furniture and dusty bookshelves, into his bedroom, the only place with a proper bed. He laid her down carefully, her alien armor clicking softly against the simple cotton sheets. She looked impossibly out of place, a being of starlight and advanced technology against his rustic, earthbound wife. Jake fetched water, towels, his basic first aid kit, though he had no idea if any of it would help. As he sat beside her, watching her labored breathing, watching the strange patterns on her skin pulse more and more faintly, he wondered if he'd just brought home a dying angel or a demon. He wouldn't have to wonder long. She should have died. Every indicator suggested it was inevitable. The wounds, the blood loss, the way her breathing grew shallower as the night deepened. Jake sat vigil beside her, changing cool cloths on her forehead. Her temperature was dangerously high now, consistently hot. He'd carefully removed what he could of her damaged armor, revealing more of the silvery patterns that covered her skin. They were beautiful, like circuitry designed by an artist, flowing in elegant spirals down her arms, across her collarbones, disappearing beneath the simple undershirt he'd found beneath the armor. At 3 a.m, she began to convulse. Jake held her down as gently as he could. Terrified, he was watching her die, helpless to stop it. She cried out in that musical language, words that sounded like grief and longing. Then, abruptly, she went still. For a horrible moment, he thought it was over. But then the patterns on her skin began to glow, bright enough to cast shadows around the room. The wounds on her side and arms sealed themselves, the purple blood disappearing as the flesh knitted back together in seconds. Her breathing deepened, stabilized. The fever broke, and her temperature normalized to something closer to human. When dawn broke, she opened her eyes. Jake had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, but jerked awake at the sound of her movement. She sat up slowly, her gaze moving around the room with sharp intelligence, cataloging every detail. The plain walls, the simple furniture, the clothes hanging in the open closet, the rifle leaning against the wall, and finally, him. They stared at each other for a long moment. Jake raised his hand slowly, palm out, hoping the gesture of peace translated across the stars. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She tilted her head, studying him with those remarkable violet eyes. Then she spoke, and to his complete shock, it was in English heavily accented, the words slightly off in cadence, but unmistakable. "You saved me." "Why?" Her voice was like wind chimes, melodic but with an underlying strength. "You were dying," Jake replied simply. "Couldn't just leave you out there." She looked down at herself, at the bandages he'd wrapped around her torso, at the simple human clothes he'd found for her, one of his shirts, loose and oversized on her frame. Her hand moved to her side, where the worst wound had been. Nothing remained but smooth, unblemished skin with those silver patterns flowing across it. "My ship is gone," she said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes, it was. Dissolving when I found you." She nodded slowly, something like resignation crossing her features. "The self-destruct protocol, to prevent contamination, to prevent discovery." She looked back at him. "You should not have brought me here. You have put yourself in great danger." "Danger from what?" She stood, moving to the window, her movements fluid and graceful despite her ordeal. In the morning light, she was even more striking otherworldly beauty, combined with an aura of barely contained power. She was silent for a long moment, looking out at the desert landscape, so different from whatever home she'd left behind. "From those who hunt me," she finally said. "From my own people who would rather see me dead than see me fail. And from yours, who would fear what they do not understand." She turned back to him. "I am Lyra. I was a commander in the Stellar Guard, protector of the outer colonies. But I discovered something I was not meant to see, learned truths that powerful people wanted buried. I fled, and they pursued. My ship was damaged in the chase. I came here because it was remote, because I thought I could repair my vessel and escape before anyone found me. I was wrong." Jake absorbed this, his practical mind struggling with the sheer impossibility of it all. A day ago, his biggest concern was whether to sell some cattle early or wait for better market prices. Now he had an alien fugitive in his bedroom, telling him about interstellar politics and conspiracies. "What truth?" he asked. "What did you discover?" Lyra's expression darkened. "That's not your burden to carry, human. The less you know, the safer you'll be. You've done enough by saving my life. I will leave soon, find another way off this planet. You can forget this ever happened." But Jake Morrison was stubborn. It was one of his defining characteristics, the trait that had kept him on this ranch when everyone else said he should sell and move on. "You don't have a ship anymore? How exactly are you planning to leave?" She turned away, but not before he saw the flash of desperation in her eyes. "I will find a way. You can stay," he heard himself saying. "At least until you figure out what to do next. This ranch is isolated. Nobody comes out here unless I invite them. You'll be safe. Why?" She asked again, that same question, now tinged with suspicion. "Why would you risk this for me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Jake thought about that, about the loneliness of the past decade, about waking up every day to the same routine, the same empty house, the same quiet that had once been peace but had gradually become suffocating, about looking up at the stars at night and wondering if there was more to existence than fences and cattle and slowly growing old alone. "Maybe I'm curious," he said finally. "Maybe I'm tired of being alone. Or maybe I just think everyone deserves a chance, no matter where they're from." The first week was an exercise in cautious coexistence. Lyra remained largely confined to the house, watching through windows as Jake went about his daily work. He'd given her books, shown her how to use the television and internet. She absorbed information with frightening speed, learning about Earth culture and history in days what would take a human months. She was particularly fascinated by human concepts of justice and freedom, ideas that apparently resonated with whatever had driven her to flee her own people. They spoke in the evenings after Jake finished his work. He learned that her species, the Aethery, had evolved on a world in a star system he couldn't pronounce, hundreds of light years away. They were an ancient civilization, explorers and guardians of the outer reaches of the galaxy. The silver patterns on her skin were biological technology, neural interfaces that had once connected her to her ship and weapons systems. Without them, she was limited, vulnerable, but still formidable. She learned about his life, the wife who'd left because she wanted more than ranch life could offer, the parents he'd lost, the simple existence he'd built in isolation. She seemed puzzled by his choice to remain alone, to not seek out companionship in nearby towns. "Your species is social," she observed one evening. "You need connection. Why do you deny yourself this?" "Got tired of being disappointed," Jake admitted. "Out here, the only expectations are the ones I set for myself." "That sounds lonely," Lyra said softly. "Lonely's just another word for peaceful," he replied. But even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. Everything changed on the 8th day. Jake had driven into town for supplies, a 2-hour round trip he made monthly. He'd left Lyra with strict instructions to stay inside, out of sight. When he returned, he found her standing in the yard, rigid with tension, her eyes fixed on the sky. "What's wrong?" he asked, dropping the supply bags. "They're here," she whispered. "I felt them arrive, a scout ship in orbit. They're searching for me." Jake followed her gaze, but saw nothing but blue sky and scattered clouds. "How do you know?" She tapped her temple, where some of the silver patterns were concentrated. "I still have basic sensory connections. I can feel their scanning frequencies, their sensor sweeps. They're systematic, searching sector by sector. It's only a matter of time before they find residual traces of my ship's signature." "How long?" "Days, maybe less." She finally looked at him, and he saw genuine fear there. "You need to turn me in. Tell them you found me, that you were keeping me contained. They might spare you if you cooperate." "No." The word came out flat, definitive. "Jake, you don't understand what you're refusing. The Aetheri are not forgiving to those who harbor fugitives. And if it's the faction that's hunting me, they're even worse. They'll kill you without hesitation. Then we make sure they don't find you." Lyra shook her head. "There's nowhere to hide. Their sensors can penetrate deep underground, detect biological signatures through almost any shielding. I'm trapped here, and I've trapped you with me." But Jake was already thinking, his practical mind working through the problem. The ranch had something most places didn't hold mines, abandoned since the 1800s, honeycombing the hills to the north. His grandfather had shown them to him as a boy, warned him to stay away from the unstable shafts. They went deep, and the rock was rich in heavy metals. "What if we could shield your biological signature?" he asked. "What kind of metals would interfere with their sensors?" Lyra's eyes widened. "Significant amounts of lead or tungsten could create interference, but you'd need... I've got mines full of this stuff. Old mining operations, abandoned tunnels. If we can get you deep enough, surround you with enough rock and metal ... She stared at him. "You're serious. Do you have a better idea?" She didn't. They spent the rest of that day preparing. Jake gathered supplies. Food, water, blankets, lights, anything Lyra might need for an extended stay underground. She protested that he was putting himself at too much risk, that he should distance himself from her while he still could. He ignored her. As night fell, they loaded everything into his truck and drove to the old mine entrance on the northern edge of his property. The tunnel opening was partially collapsed, overgrown with desert scrub, exactly as he remembered. They cleared the entrance and ventured inside, flashlight beams cutting through decades of darkness. The air was cool and still, smelling of earth and stone. They went deep, past the first chambers, past the secondary shafts, until they reached a natural cavern his grandfather had once used for storage. It was dry, stable, and surrounded by walls of rock that Jake knew contained high concentrations of ore. "This is where you're suggesting I hide?" Lyra asked, her voice echoing slightly. "It's not the Ritz, but it'll keep you off their sensors." They set up a camp of sorts blankets, battery-powered lights, supplies stacked against the wall. It was crude, uncomfortable, but it might work. Lyra tested the area with her heightened senses and nodded slowly. "The interference is significant. If I remain here, stay quiet, and still, I might escape detection." Might? There are no guarantees in war, Jake. And make no mistake, this is war. Even if your world doesn't know it yet. Before he left her there, she caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've spent my life in service to others, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It's strange to be on the other side, to be the one who needs saving." "Everyone needs saving sometimes," Jake replied. He climbed back to the surface alone, covered the entrance carefully, and drove home under a star-filled sky that suddenly seemed far less empty than it had for years. The next 3 days were the longest of Jake's life. He maintained his normal routine, tending to the ranch, even forcing himself to drive into town to establish his presence, his normalcy. But every moment, he was aware of the weight of what he was hiding, of the woman the alien warrior concealed beneath his land. He visited her twice a day, bringing fresh supplies, news from the outside world. The news was increasingly troubling. There had been reports of unusual military activity, unmarked helicopters in the area, and talk in town of some kind of training exercise. Jake knew better. They were here. The Ethery, or whoever was hunting Lyra, they arrived in force. On the third night, as he made his way to the mine entrance in darkness, he spotted lights in the sky, not stars or planes, but something that moved with impossible precision, scanning beams cutting through the night like searchlights. He froze, watching from the shadow of a rock formation as the lights passed overhead, sweeping across his property. The beams had a strange quality, visible even through solid matter, as if they could peel back the layers of reality itself. He waited until they passed, then hurried to the mine. Lyra was pacing when he arrived, her enhanced hearing having picked up his approach. "They were here," she said immediately. "I felt the scan pass overhead. It's only a matter of time. Then we need a better plan than just hiding." "There is no better plan, Jake. I can't leave the planet without a ship, and I can't build one without resources I don't have access to. I'm trapped here, and every day I remain, I put you in more danger." Jake set down the supplies he brought and studied her. In the dim light of the battery lamps, the silver patterns on her skin seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with her heartbeat. She looked tired, worn down by the strain of hiding, of being hunted. But beneath that exhaustion, he could still see the warrior she'd been proud, strong, dangerous. "Tell me about what you discovered," he said. "The truth that made you run. I deserve to know what I'm risking my life for." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down on the rough stone floor, and he sat across from her, waiting. "The Ethery are not what they appear to be," she began. "We present ourselves as explorers, as peaceful guardians of the galaxy. And for most, that's true. But there's a faction within our leadership, a group that believes in control above all else. They've been secretly observing your world for decades, studying you, manipulating events to keep you confined here, to keep you from developing faster than light travel. Why? Because humanity scares them. Your species has something that most advanced civilizations have lost: unpredictability, chaos, innovation born from conflict and struggle. Most successful spacefaring species develop along similar paths, become predictable, stable, controllable. But humans? You're different. You're volatile and creative and capable of incredible good and terrible evil, often simultaneously. The faction fears what you could become if unleashed on the galaxy." Jake absorbed this, the implications staggering. "So they're keeping us contained? How?" "Small interventions, a critical experiment that fails, a brilliant scientist who dies too young, a breakthrough that gets suppressed. Nothing so obvious as to reveal their presence, but enough to slow your progress, to keep you earthbound for a few more centuries until they can decide what to do with you." "And you found evidence of this?" "I found more than evidence. I found their plans for the next phase. They're preparing to make contact, but not the benevolent first contact humanity dreams of. They want to present themselves as saviors, as benevolent guides, while in reality, they'll be your jailers. They'll share just enough technology to make humanity dependent on them, but never enough to allow true independence. They'll turn Earth into a client state, a vassal world." The anger in her voice was palpable. "I was to be part of this operation. When I learned the truth, when I refused to participate, I became a liability. They couldn't let me reach any neutral parties, any of the other galactic civilizations who might oppose this. So they sent hunters, assassins, the best our people have. But you're still alive. For now. But Jake, if they find me, they'll kill anyone who's helped me. They can't leave witnesses. This isn't just about catching a fugitive. It's about maintaining the secrecy of their operation. You need to understand that. Jake met her eyes. I understand. I'm still not turning you in. Why? That question again, but this time asked with something like wonder. Because it's the right thing to do. And because maybe, just maybe, humanity deserves to know the truth about what's out there. Even if it's scary. Especially if it's scary. Before Lyra could respond, they both heard a sound from above, from the direction of the mine entrance. Footsteps. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. Jake's hand went to his rifle, but Lyra grabbed his wrist, shaking her head. Her other hand went to her temple, her expression going distant as she focused her enhanced senses. 5 of them, she whispered. Human, but equipped with ethery technology. Mercenaries or corrupted officials. They're scanning the mine entrance. Can they detect you? Not yet. But if they come deeper... She stood, her body tensing, preparing for a fight. Jake saw something shift in her then, saw the warrior emerge fully as the patterns on her skin began to glow brighter. If they come down here, you need to run, she said. There's another exit, the old ventilation shaft. I found it yesterday. I can hold them long enough for you to escape. I'm not leaving you. Jake, I said I'm not leaving you. The sound of footsteps grew closer, echoing down the mine shaft. Jake could hear voices now, speaking in clipped professional tones. The beams of high-powered flashlights danced on the walls, growing brighter. Lyra moved with fluid grace to the cavern entrance, positioning herself in the shadows where she'd have the advantage. Even without her armor, without her weapons, she radiated danger. The silver patterns on her skin were fully luminescent now, and Jake realized they weren't just decorative. They were functional, enhancing her strength, her speed, her senses. She was preparing for battle. Last chance, she whispered. The ventilation shaft is behind you, 20 feet. Please, Jake, you've done enough. But Jake Morrison had made his choice. He'd made it the moment he'd lifted her broken body from the desert sand, and he'd reaffirmed it with every subsequent decision. He positioned himself behind a rock formation, rifle ready, and shook his head. For the first time since he'd met her, Lyra smiled, a fierce, warrior smile that held both gratitude and resignation. The first mercenary entered the cavern cautiously. Weapon raised something that looked like a rifle, but with strange modifications. Glowing elements that suggested it was far more advanced than anything human-made. He was followed by 2 more, spreading out tactically, their movements professional. Thermal readings indicate 2 life forms, one set into a unit, one human, one unknown. Weight confirming ethery biological signature. Target acquired. Lyra stepped out of the shadows. Even in simple human clothes, even without her armor, she was magnificent, a being of light and power and barely contained fury. Stand down, she commanded, her voice carrying a weight of authority that made even the hardened mercenaries hesitate. This human is innocent. He has no part in your hunt. Let him leave. The lead mercenary laughed, a harsh sound. Commander Lyra, the bounty on you is substantial enough to retire on. As for the human, he's a witness. He's compromised. You know the protocols. I know that you're being used, Lyra shot back. Used by people who would turn Earth into a prison. Did they tell you that? Did they tell you what your own governments have agreed to? What they've sold their people for? Not our concern. We're here for you. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion so fast Jake could barely track it. Lyra moved, and it was like watching water flow fluid, inevitable, unstoppable. She disarmed the first mercenary before he could fire, using his own weapon to strike the second. The third got off a shot, but Lyra twisted impossibly, the energy blast scorching the rock where she'd been standing a microsecond before. The fight was brief and brutal. For all their training and advanced equipment, the mercenaries were no match for an ethery warrior in her element. Within seconds, all three were down, unconscious or groaning in pain. But Jake had heard the lead mercenary's words. 5 of them. Where were the other 2? The answer came in the form of a blinding flash and a concussive force that slammed both Jake and Lyra to the ground. The cavern filled with choking dust and the smell of ozone. Through the haze, 2 more figures emerged, these ones in full combat armor, their weapons trained on Lyra. Stun her, one commanded. Kill the human. No witnesses. Time seemed to slow. Jake saw the weapons swinging toward him, saw Lyra struggling to rise from the blast that had caught her off guard. He tried to bring his rifle around, knowing he wouldn't make it, knowing this was how it ended. Then the cavern was filled with light, not the harsh glare of the mercenaries' weapons, but something else, something that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The temperature dropped instantly, frost forming on the rocks, on the weapons, on the armor of the mercenaries. And standing at the far end of the cavern, emerging from the ventilation shaft Jake had refused to use, was another figure. This one was clearly ethery, taller than Lyra, wearing elaborate armor that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. The patterns on this newcomer's skin were gold instead of silver, and they blazed with power that made even Lyra's luminescence look dim. Cease, the newcomer commanded, and it wasn't just a word but a force that physically pushed everyone back. The mercenaries' weapons sparked and died, their systems overloaded. They stumbled backward, clearly outmatched. This operation is terminated. The golden-patterned ethery continued. By authority of the Galactic Council, all involved parties are to stand down immediately. The Council has reviewed Commander Lyra's evidence, and her claims have been verified. The Shadow faction has been exposed, and warrants have been issued for all involved in the Earth containment operation. Lyra stared, disbelief and hope warring on her face. Counselor Theron? The newcomer Theron nodded. Your message reached us, Commander. The evidence you compiled was extensive, damning, and irrefutable. The Shadow faction's leaders are already being arrested. You're not a fugitive anymore. You're a hero. The mercenaries, realizing they were now on the wrong side of galactic law, fled. No one tried to stop them. Jake, still processing everything, slowly lowered his rifle. Theron turned attention to him, those golden eyes studying him with an intensity that was both alien and oddly understanding. You are Jake Morrison, Theron said. The human who harbored a fugitive, who risked execution to protect someone he didn't know, for a cause he didn't fully understand. Jake found his voice. She needed help. Seemed like the right thing to do. Theron's stern expression softened into something that might have been amusement. The ethery have a saying. Character is revealed not in the comfort of safety, but in the crucible of choice. You have impressed me, Jake Morrison. You have impressed the Council. Lyra moved to Jake's side, still stunned. What happens now? Now, Theron said, we have much work to do. The Earth containment operation must be dismantled. Your governments must be informed, carefully, gradually, but truthfully. Humanity deserves to know they were being manipulated, and they deserve the chance to join the galactic community as equals, not subjects. Theron paused, looking between Lyra and Jake. And Commander Lyra must decide what comes next for her. The following weeks passed in a strange blur of the mundane and the extraordinary. Counselor Theron and a small delegation established a temporary base at the ranch with Jake's somewhat shell-shocked permission. They assured him it was temporary, that soon official channels would be established, that humanity's introduction to the wider galaxy would begin in earnest. But for now, this isolated ranch in New Mexico was ground zero for the most significant moment in human history. Jake watched as Lyra testified remotely to the Galactic Council, as evidence was compiled, as the Shadow faction's conspiracy unraveled. Several high-ranking ethery officials were arrested. Others fled but were being hunted. The faction's operation to control Earth's development was completely dismantled. though the process of undoing decades of subtle interference would take years. Representatives from world governments began arriving, escorted by council mediators. Jake was politely but firmly asked to keep quiet about his role, not for secrecy, but for his own protection. He agreed, content to watch history unfold from the sidelines. But through it all, he was most aware of Lyra. She was different, now vindicated, her honor restored, her mission accomplished. The Galactic Council offered her reinstatement, her old rank back, new opportunities. She had saved not just her own people's integrity, but potentially humanity's future. She should have been celebrating. Instead, she seemed troubled. It was a month after Theron's arrival that Jake found her sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar gold and crimson. The delegates had finally left that morning, returning to their various posts. The ranch was quiet again, or as quiet as it could be, with advanced alien technology monitoring the perimeter. "They're offering me the position of official liaison to Earth," Lyra said as he sat beside her. "First contact coordinator. I'd be responsible for guiding humanity's integration into the galactic community, for helping your people navigate the complexities of interstellar society." "Sounds important," Jake said. "It is. It's everything I've worked for: redemption, purpose, a chance to make real change. But it would mean staying here, on Earth, for years, maybe decades. My superiors think I'm the ideal candidate, since I already understand your people. Since I've proven I can work with humans." She glanced at him. "Since I've proven I can trust them." Jake was quiet, processing. "And you're not sure if you want that?" Lyra turned to face him fully. "A month ago, I was alone, hunted, prepared to die on an alien world far from home. Then a stubborn cowboy refused to let me die, refused to let me hide, refused to let me face my enemies alone. You didn't do it for reward or recognition. You did it because it was right, because you saw someone who needed help, and you helped. Lyra, let me finish. This planet, this strange, chaotic, beautiful world, it's grown on me. More specifically, this isolated ranch and the man who lives here have grown on me. I've spent my life serving the greater good, following orders, being the soldier. But you taught me something, Jake. You taught me that sometimes the greatest good is found in small choices, in simple kindness, in the courage to care about one individual when the entire universe is telling you to think bigger." She took a breath. "If I accept this position, I need a base of operations. Somewhere remote where I could work without constant scrutiny. Councillor Theron suggested I might establish it here, if you'd agree. This ranch would become, in essence, Earth's first extraterrestrial embassy." Jake felt his heart racing. "You want to stay?" "Here, I want to stay with you," Lyra corrected. "If you'll have me. I know it's strange. I know we're from different worlds literally and figuratively. But these past weeks, I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time. I felt home." Jake Morrison had spent a decade alone, convinced that solitude was the same as peace, that isolation was the same as safety. He'd built walls around his life, around his heart, telling himself it was better this way, simpler. But looking at this extraordinary being who had fallen from the stars into his life, who had brought chaos and wonder and meaning, he realized how wrong he'd been. Loneliness wasn't peace. It was just the slow dying of hope. "I'm just a rancher," he said quietly. "You're a commander, a warrior, a hero to your people. What could I possibly offer you that would be worth staying for?" Lyra reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her skin was warm, the silver patterns pulsing softly with her heartbeat, a physical reminder of the vast gulf of evolution and technology between them. Yet her grip was gentle, human in its tenderness. "You offered me kindness when you had every reason to walk away. You offered me protection when it put you in danger. You offered me trust when I was just an alien stranger. Those aren't small things, Jake. Those are everything." She smiled. "Besides, you have a nice ranch, good views, terrible coffee, but I can teach you how to make it properly." Jake laughed, surprised by the sound, by how natural it felt. "So you're staying for the coffee?" "I'm staying for a lot of reasons. But mostly, I'm staying because when I look at the stars now, I don't just see home. I see the universe that brought me here, to this desert, to you. And I'd rather stay and explore that mystery than go back to the life I had before." The sun was setting fully now, the first stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The same stars that had been his only company for so long, but which no longer felt distant and indifferent. They were home to countless worlds, to beings like Lyra, to possibilities he'd never imagined. And somehow, impossibly, one of those possibilities had landed in his life and decided to stay. "Yes," he said simply. "Stay. Build your embassy. Make your terrible alien coffee. Teach Earth about the galaxy. Just stay." Lyra's smile widened, and in that moment, she looked less like an ancient alien warrior and more like someone who'd finally found what they'd been searching for. "There's one more thing you should know. The Council's investigation revealed something interesting about Earth's position in the galaxy. Your world sits at a crossroads of several major stellar trade routes. Once humanity develops faster than light travel, which will happen much sooner now without interference, Earth will become one of the most strategically important worlds in this sector." Meaning? "Meaning this ranch, this isolated place you chose for peace and quiet, is about to become one of the busiest diplomatic centers in the galaxy. I hope you're ready for visitors." Jake groaned. "I went from seeing maybe 5 people a month to hosting the first alien embassy on Earth. My quiet life is completely over, isn't it?" "Completely," Lyra agreed cheerfully. "But look at it this way. You'll never be lonely again." She had a point. In the months and years that followed, the ranch transformed. Carefully concealed facilities were built underground, providing Lyra with the technology she needed to coordinate Earth's integration into galactic society. Human scientists and diplomats came regularly, learning from her, preparing humanity for its future among the stars. Jake found himself hosting representatives from a dozen different species, learning about cultures and technologies that would have seemed like fantasy just months before. But through all the changes, some things remained constant. The ranch still operated. Jake still tended his cattle and horses, still rode out to check fence lines at dawn. Lyra often accompanied him, trading her commander's bearing for simple work clothes, learning to appreciate the rhythm of ranch life. She was surprisingly good with the horses, though she claimed they were primitive compared to the riding animals of her homeworld. They became partners in every sense in work, in the monumental task of preparing humanity for the stars, and in something more personal that grew gradually, naturally, like desert flowers after rain. Their relationship raised eyebrows among both humans and aliens, but Lyra had faced down conspiracies and assassins. She wasn't intimidated by disapproving stares. 2 years after that first night, Jake stood in the same spot where he'd first seen her ship falling from the sky. Lyra stood beside him, her hand in his, both of them watching as humanity's first faster-than-light vessel built with E3 guidance, but human ingenuity made its maiden voyage. The ship rose silently, accelerating upward, then vanished in a flash of light as it entered hyperspace. "Your people learn quickly," Lyra observed. "The Council estimated it would take a decade to reach this point. You did it in 2 years. We're stubborn," Jake replied. "And apparently pretty chaotic. That's what makes you special. That's what the Shadow faction feared, that humanity wouldn't follow the predictable paths, that you'd rewrite the rules." She looked up at him. "They were right to be afraid. In just 2 years, you've already started changing galactic society. 3 new worlds have applied to join the Council, inspired by Earth's example. Trade agreements are being renegotiated. Old certainties are being questioned. Is that a good thing? It's a necessary thing. The galaxy was becoming stagnant, complacent. You're shaking things up." She smiled. I think my people needed that. We all did. They walked back to the ranch house, now much expanded, with wings for visiting dignitaries and underground facilities humming with activity. But their private quarters remained simple, a sanctuary of normalcy amid the chaos of two worlds colliding. That night, lying in bed, Lyra traced the patterns of Jake's face with her fingers, memorizing details as if she might forget them. The silver patterns on her own skin glowed softly in the darkness, casting gentle light. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Your quiet life, your peace. I took all of that from you." Jake considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, he'd been alone, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. Now his days were filled with impossible wonders, with challenges and frustrations and moments of breathtaking beauty. His house was full of noise and activity. His solitude was gone. He'd never been happier. "You didn't take anything from me," he said. "You gave me everything. You gave me purpose. You gave me a future worth waking up for. You gave me you." "Humanity has a phrase I've learned," Lyra said. "Home is where the heart is." I never understood it before. The Aetheri are taught that home is your birthplace, your genetic origin. But you've taught me differently. Home isn't a place. It's a person. It's a choice. And you chose here. You chose this. I chose you, she corrected. Everything else followed from that. Outside, under the vast New Mexico sky, the stars burned with renewed mystery. Somewhere up there, among those infinite lights, were the worlds Lyra had known, the battles she'd fought, the life she'd left behind. But she didn't look back with longing anymore. She looked forward to the future they were building together, a future where a cowboy and an alien warrior could find home in each other's arms, where Earth and the stars could meet as equals, where the universe was stranger and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. And in a modest ranch house on the edge of nowhere, in the space between two worlds, two hearts beat in synchrony, one human, one Aetheri, both proving that the greatest distances can be crossed with courage, kindness, and the simple willingness to care. The alien woman who had closed her eyes to die in the desert had awakened to something far more precious than survival. She'd awakened to life, to love, to home. And the lonely cowboy who'd spent a decade hiding from the world had discovered that sometimes the universe delivers exactly what you need, even when you don't know you need it, even when it falls from the sky with crashed ships and impossible violet eyes. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber, Jake and Lyra slept peacefully, two beings from different worlds who'd found their place in the universe. Not in the vastness of space or the isolation of Earth, but in the space between heartbeats, in the warmth of shared breath, in the quiet certainty that wherever they were together was exactly where they belonged. The stars had brought them together. Love would keep them that way. And in the years to come, their story would become legend, the tale of humanity's first contact, yes, but more importantly, the story of how an alien warrior and a stubborn cowboy proved that the universe, for all its vastness and mystery, ultimately turns on the smallest, most human of things. The choice to help a stranger, the courage to trust, and the willingness to let love rewrite destiny. The end and the beginning.